In terms of again, Mr. Bradley's point, I mean, what he's saying is this, and I think that your opinion as civil servants would be welcome. See, the government here, led by the Finance Minister, were against the sale of the NAMA assets north of the border. But then they had a road to Damascus moment, and they said, no, now we're in favour of it, let's sell them. And in fact, at one point they were saying maybe a closed sale would be good. And that coincides exactly, as we now know, with Mr. Coulter and Mr. Cushnan trying to sell and hawk the portfolio. And of course, as we know, they were both in line for a large payment if that had have succeeded. And it's that volte-face, we're against the sale, then we're for the sale, and people have made cogent arguments. In fact, you haven't really made them today because perhaps it's not your place. People have made cogent arguments for that change, that dramatic overnight change. But do you not accept it would have been appropriate for ministers to seek advice from officials before they adopted a line which we now know was being promoted by people who were set to gain from the sale?
Well, a couple of points there. Like, firstly, if there's any evidence that anybody was advancing a particular line to further their own purposes or to gain something, then that evidence should obviously be brought to the NCA, PSNI, who are investigating these matters.
You're wrong. I'm going to help you, David. You're wrong, because NAMA took a decision in October 2013 when they went to the meeting of or around that time, they went to the meeting of the NI Advisory Committee on NAMA, at which Mr. Cushnan was sitting, and they said, we're going to sell this portfolio, and we've had an offer. But their decision to sell, came after, and there is evidence of this. I mean, and you've seen the evidence from PIMCO, came after an effort had been made to sell the portfolio, and PIMCO had been courted in that regard. So the decision to sell or to market the portfolio, I mean, you're saying, is there any evidence of that? Well, we have the evidence. We've seen the evidence. I mean, you've seen the evidence. It's a letter from PIMCO, among other things, which says we were approached by Brown Rudnick. We were told there would be a success fee to pay to Mr. Cushnan, among others, and that they were proceeding with that until they were told it was against the law, it was against US law, and they stepped out. So the evidence exists, and it predates NAMA's decision to sell. The evidence exists that there were people here working to follow one individual line and to sell the entire portfolio. And what I'm saying is government changed its mind, because government was against that. But coincidentally, as Mr. Coulter and Mr. Cushnan started to advance that line, let's sell this, government did a U-turn. Government flip-flopped. Government said, OK, let's now support that sale. And we know the government supported that sale because the Finance Minister and the First Minister met PIMCO to endorse and encourage that line of action. Do you not accept that? So you say you have learned from the NAMA Cerberus scandal, you've learned that we perhaps should minute more meetings, more exchanges. That's what you're saying today.
I wouldn't characterise it as a scandal. If investigations subsequently prove that to be the case, then so be it.
What do you call £6 million the Isle of Man?
You've pressed me on this point before. I'm here to help you.
Let's call it a venture. Let's call it a venture, not an adventure, but a venture. Say you've learned from the NAMA Cerberus venture that you should minute more meetings.
Yes, and it's not just, sorry, this just doesn't arise from what we've experienced in regard to this. It's just generally how we have, it has pointed to the fact that, yeah, we probably have not been consistent in the way we minute meetings, and that we do need to be consistent in the future.
Have you learned anything else?
It's probably too early to say, because your inquiry is still very much gathering evidence. The NCA inquiry is still gathering evidence, as I understand it. I will wait until all this is concluded. And genuinely, I look forward to advice, recommendations that this committee might wish to make about what has happened here. If there are things that we can do in the future which would be better if there's a similar circumstance that arises, then we'll be more than happy to take that on board and implement it.
And I accept that, and I'm not casting any aspersions on the officials or civil serviceness, but surely you've learned that if someone is going into a meeting with ministers but the ministers aren't representing the NI executive. Ministers should make that clear. PIMCO shouldn't be going to meetings and thinking we just met the government. Service shouldn't be going to meetings thinking we just met the government. When in fact they're not meeting the government. The people they met had authority to speak on behalf of the government in any shape or form. But surely that's an important learning lesson in terms of openness and integrity and accountability.
Well, I suppose to be clear, and as a general point, I will advise ministers where I feel it's appropriate in regard to principles of public life and matters related to that. I would see that as my role.
Business associate or a friend or a confidant?
I wouldn't say. I mean, maybe a couple of people from Southern Ireland would have wanted to come into the north on some issues, and he was considered as a very person at the top of his game professionally. So again, I guess it was under this NAMA thing and the way the world had changed. There was people in Southern Ireland, I think, got hit first. Basically, they were on the top of the wave and then it crashed and then they couldn't get out, out of the water. So, they were spoken to me maybe at times about maybe speaking to somebody about advice. And certainly Frank was very good that way. He was very, very professional, I felt. So for me, I would have known him.
Would you have discussed NAMA own book with you while he was serving on the NI?
No, he was very. One thing you could say about Mr. Cushnan, he was very coy. Always kept himself. I felt anyway, kept himself right and wouldn't discuss anything outside the parameters of what was there to be discussed.
You had conversations with him during the period he was on the NI Northern Advisory.
I'm literally going back to late 2007, 8, 9, whatever.
He was really, we're taking 2010 to the end of 2013.
Yeah, we discussed. I would have discussed some clients in Southern Ireland.
Were some of those in NAMA?
No, they weren't actually. No,
None of them?
No.
Extraordinary, no?
No.
One of your colleagues, associates, clients were in NAMA. Did you discuss with them, no? You're sure?
Positive.
The issue is for us as a committee that the actions the First Minister took benefited two individuals who were set to gain in very handsome terms, perhaps £5 million each, from a sale of the assets of the northern assets of NAMA. One of those at that time was representing the interests of the people of this region, of this jurisdiction, and should have been acting according to these principles, the principles of public acting in the public interest. But at the same time, he was in line to receive a £5 million payment. That's the conflict of interest. And what surprises me is the First Minister didn't say to you, Mr. Mains, 2 days ago, I've been speaking to Ian Coulter and Mr. Cushnan about selling this portfolio. So that's, and I understand business is different from politics, but that amazes me. That amazes me that the First Minister didn't say, I am supportive of an initiative to sell the portfolio. When you met Mr. Cushnan, who had been serving on the advisory committee in NAMA, and you met Ian Coulter in Tunes, did they tell you did they tell you PIMCO was the people they were dealing with at that time?
No, they didn't say. They said that they were acting for someone. There were a couple of parties now bidding for the loan book, and they were acting for one of them.
Did you understand they were both going to get a substantial payment?
I didn't know. I wasn't aware of that at all. And as I said, that could be an issue down the road. Once this inquiry has been determined and the NCA have completed their business, then there are other things that will have to be sorted out as far as that's concerned, in my world, as far as our company is concerned.
I mean, it's one of the things we're investigating, but do you think they should have said to you, Paddy, if this goes through, we're going to get £5 million each?
Well, they should have declared that they were acting. They did have a conflict of interest as far as I was concerned with our company.
Will you work with Frank Cushnan in the future?
With Frank Cushnan? No, I had never worked. I had never worked with Frank Cushnan in the past.
Well, you met him in January 14 when you were trying to sell the portfolio.
I met him at his request to give him information, and the meeting didn't happen.
Will you work with him? Will you work with him in the future?
No, I won't. No.
Will you work with Ian Coulter in the future?
No.
I think we should have Mr. Miskelly in next week. I want to thank Mr. Mains and Mr. Kearney for doing us the courtesy of coming in and seeing us. Thank you.